Alright guys, this will be our video for notes for Tuesday, April 7th. We last talked about we got into Prussia, and we're kind of giving a backstory on Prussia, working our way up towards the enlightened absolutist rulers of Russia. Alright, so it says Prussian power would reach its zenith in the 18th century with the reign of Frederick the Great. Frederick is often cited as an example of enlightened absolutist because he was fascinated by the intellectual current from France. At his palace of Sans-Souci, Frederick established a glittering intellectual center where Voltaire would live for a time and where the king himself participated by writing philosophical tracts, which may have led Voltaire to make an early exit from the court. Frederick freed the serfs on the royal estates, though to ensure the continual support of the junker class, he refused to emancipate the serfs living on the private estates. He also brought an end to the capital punishment and limited the use of corporal punishment on serfs, though he did not emancipate the Jews living within his kingdom. Like his royal colleagues who had received the label of enlightened absolutists, Frederick used the rational thought of the age as a tool for greater royal centralization and absolutism rather than as a means of ensuring individual rights or establishing participatory political institutions. A more thoroughgoing series of reforms inspired by the Enlightenment took place in Austria, where the Empress Maria Theresa pushed a series of reforms that removed some of the hardships that had been placed on the serf population. Her son Joseph II was impressed with the idea of religious toleration, mainly because he wished to reduce the power of the Catholic Church within its domains. He viewed the Church as hostile to his plan for greater centralized authority. In 1781, he issued the first in a series of edicts of toleration, granting Jews, Lutherans, Calvinists freedom of worship. Civil liabilities were still left in place for Jews, while Protestants could enter into the Habsburg civil service. Jews were still barred and were forced to pay special taxes for the right to worship. Joseph antagonized his aristocracy by making them responsible for taxes and by abolishing serfdom. Following his death in 1790, his brother and his heir, Leopold II, was forced to back away from some of those enlightened policies in order to put an end to a series of aristocratic and peasant revolts. Unfortunately, when they were not pursuing the writings of the philosophes, the rulers of Prussia and Austria were often engaged in violent conflict. The roots of the War of Austrian Succession began during the reign of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI. Because he lacked a male heir, Charles VI pushed the other European states to accept what was known as the Pragmatic Sanction, allowing for the assorted Habsburg lands under his control to remain intact under one ruler and granting the right of a female to succeed to the throne of Austria, Maria Theresa, if there was no direct male heir. When Charles died without leaving a son, his daughter Maria Theresa came to the throne. While both France and Prussia had promised to respect the Pragmatic Sanction, both nations viewed the death of Charles as an opportunity to gain territory at the expense of the Austrians. Frederick immediately launched an attack to seize Silesia, the richest part of the Austrian Empire at the northern eastern border of Bohemia. Regaining Silesia was to prove impossible for Maria Theresa, but with the help of Hungarian nobility, which had agreed to the Pragmatic Sanction, in exchange for recognition of Hungary as an independent kingdom, she was able to put down their dangerous revolt in Bohemia and remain on the throne. The conflict became a general European war. Austria gained support from Russia, Sweden, Denmark, and eventually Great Britain, which feared French territorial gains in Austria and Netherlands. Opposing them were an alliance made up of Prussia, France, and Spain. By the time of the war came to a close in 1748 with the signing of the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, the Austrian throne was ultimately saved for the Habsburgs. Because women remained ineligible to head their home Roman Empire, Maria Theresa's husband was to hold that position as Emperor Francis I. One result of the war was that Prussia emerged as a German state and as a major rival to Austria. Understanding that Prussia under its aggressive King Frederick would continue to be a threat, in 1756 Maria Theresa's able foreign minister, Count Kaunitz, brought about what became known as the diplomatic revolution or reversal of alliances. By working out an alliance with France, the traditional enemy of the Austrian Habsburgs, in a state that was increasingly wary of growing Prussian power, France also demanded the Austrian Netherlands as their price for this alliance. Sweden and Russia signed on as a part of this alliance that increasingly looked as if it would result in significant territorial gains at the expense of the Prussians. The other side of the diplomatic revolution was that Great Britain broke off its ties with Austria and became allies with Prussia, and while the British did not contribute men to the war on the continent, their financial subsidies were vital in enabling Frederick to continue fighting. The diplomatic revolution led directly to the 7 Years' War, which started when Frederick launched an attack in 1756 in order to quickly put down his enemies before they had an opportunity to form a cohesive military plan to defeat Prussia. Initially, the bold Prussian plan paid off as Frederick first defeated a French and then Austrian army, but disaster struck when a massive Russian army arrived from the east and took Frederick's capital, Berlin. Only the crowning of our new Russian Tsar, Peter III, in 1762 staved off the complete destruction of the Prussian state. Because Peter, an admirer of Frederick, wanted no part in this conflict and brought his army home, so Frederick, by preserving the Prussian state, was the clear winner on the continent. While his British allies had won a series of tremendous victories overseas against the French, particularly in the French-Indian War, resulting in the confiscation of French colonies in India and Canada. Okay, Russia. Until the 18th century, Russia remained largely closed off to the Western Europe as a result of the Mongol invasion of the 13th century. Some trade did exist. For instance, Elizabethan England imported Russian timber for the building of ships, but for the most part, Russia was not affected by developments in the West, most notably missing out on the humanistic culture of the Italian Renaissance. By the 16th century, the Duchy of Moscow Muscovy would emerge as a dominant state within the Russian steppe, an area that had absorbed a number of other rival states while pushing the Mongols back to the east. During the reign of the appropriately named Ivan the Terrible, there was significant expansion of the territory under the control of Muscovy, while Ivan also saw it often through staggeringly violent means to gain control over recalcitrant nobility. Following his death in 1584, Russia entered into the period called the Time of Troubles, which lasted until the selection of a czar from the Romanov family in 1603, and the dynasty that would continue to rule Russia until the revolution of 1917. The individual who did the most to transform Russian state into a major European power was Peter the Great. As a young man, Peter traveled to the West, where he became fascinated by the work done in Dutch shipyards and other examples of Western technology. Upon his return to Russia, Peter was determined to westernize his backward state. Peter expanded the revenue available to the monarchy by imposing head taxes on Russian serfs while also establishing monopolies on essential commodities such as salt. Peter used this expanded revenue to follow the lead of absolute states in Europe and establish a centralized bureaucracy in order to ensure the loyalty of his nobility as well as use them for governance. Peter established a table of ranks in which all positions in the state had graduated rankings, which also provided opportunity for commoners to rise up in the ranks and reach a coveted position as a noble. Just as in Prussia, the nobility were to be used as an essential tool of royal absolutism. In keeping with his desire to keep a window to the west, Peter established the eponymous city of St. Petersburg in 1703. The city was built on what seemed to be unpromising marshland, and thousands of serf laborers would lose their lives in the building of the grand city with architecture that mimicked the newest styles from France. We'll stop. We got a few more minutes. At the start of World War I, many of the Russian officers had German names, the descendants of Western military experts that Peter invited to Russia to help him establish a standing army. To ensure that he had enough soldiers, Peter conscripted serfs to serve in his force for the interminable period of 20 years. Peter also built the first Russian navy. Peter used his army to greatly expand Russian territory in achieving his goal. He was fortunate that his state was becoming more powerful at the same time that the major states on his borders, the Ottoman Empire and the Kingdom of Poland and Lithuania, were in relative decline. Most notably, he defeated the Swedes in the Great Northern War, which marked the end of the brief period going back to the age of Gustavus Adolphus in the 17th century when Sweden was a great European power. The westward outlook of Russia during the reign of Peter would continue under his successors. Western thought, particularly in the writings of French philosophers, would play a role in inspiring the reign of Catherine the Great. While the story of Catherine and the horse is most likely the stuff of legend, she was a robust, sexually active woman who read Montesquieu and Voltaire and toyed with the ways to apply their ideas to her still semi-barbaric state. Catherine began the process of revisiting and codifying Russian law, but for the most part she only dabbled with bringing about actual reform. Once she became convinced later on in her reign that enlightened thought could pose a challenge to her monarchy, she dropped the idea entirely. While a few practical results stemmed from Catherine's infatuation with Enlightenment thought, it did help establish the primacy of French culture and ideas among the Russian aristocracy, and we'll stop